At UCLA, my organic chemistry class sat 300 pre-meds. Now, I want you to imagine 201 of those classrooms, each seating 300 students. That gives you 60,300 pre-meds. And that's exactly how many pre-meds apply to medical school in 2021. And the undergrad that has the most pre-med applicants by far is UCLA. Same courses, same professors writing the same letters of recommendations, same extracurricular activities with the same research opportunities. The competition's so tight, it can feel suffocating. Even if you have high stats, like this 3.85 GPA, 514 MCAT Bruin, he ends up earning multiple acceptances to fantastic USMD schools, and we'll learn what about his app was so enticing to admissions committees. Equally as important, we'll also see key mistakes that he makes. You'll certainly want to avoid these. Let's get started. All right. Today we have another application breakdown from a high stat individual from California who ends up at a fantastic medical school, top 60 medical school of ECU. So we'll just dive into stats for some context here. We start freshman year pretty strong, 3.9, 3.8, 3.87, 3.9. So pretty strong all the way through his science career curricula. And then for his all other GPAs, we have a little bit of a blip sophomore year with the 3.3, but this was in about 7.3 hours or credits. So I imagine he probably got a B or 2 in one of his GEs or something of the sort. The thing is, it dwarfs in comparison to the amount of units in the science GPA here. So you'll notice that his GPA for sophomore year is closer to 3.79 than 3.3, which ends up at 3.68. Overall, all other 3.76, he has a stronger science GPA than all other GPA, which is not something you see that often. But overall, a strong 3.83 total GPA. 514 on the MCAT gives him a top 10% MCAT score. A very strong Chem Phys, very strong Cars, 10%. 128 on the Biochem, very, very respectable. And then a little bit of a blip on the Psych-Soc section, 70% tile. So you can see if every section on this test matters, right? Every section is out of 132. Every section, if you bring this up by 1 point, it brings your overall score up by 1 point. It's not like any particular section is weighed more than the other. And so make sure you're well-rounded, right? He's consistently performing in the top 10, top 15%, and then he drops to the top 30% for this Psych-Soc. It might have just been the day, but I can imagine this being 130, which is probably in the 85th and 90th percentile, just like the other ones, and this score becoming 517, and that looks a little bit different than 514. Okay, so overall 3.85, 514 from California, overrepresented majority ethnicity. And let's just jump straight into the conclusions here. So conclusion number 1, there's a couple of great things that this application does, and we can learn a ton from how he approached his writing. The first conclusion is it is your job as the author of this application to give the reader something to relate to, something that they can universally understand. Whether it's an emotion, a frustration, an experience, there are many places in this application that just don't feel perfectly accessible, right? It almost feels like evil scientists in the lab. It almost feels too academic and too separated. And I noticed that as a reader at times where I felt like I wanted to understand more, but because of the complexity of the science or because of the way that the writing was done, it didn't feel perfectly relatable. So we'll see a couple of examples in green asterisks here for me to show you exactly what I mean. Number 2, recognize the tone that your writing exudes, right? Your writing is a reflection of you. The tone that it shows is a reflection of your personality. And recognize that all writing carries a voice. Just make sure that that voice is authentically yours, or there'll be something that I call person-to-paper mismatch, where the paper has one tone, and then you meet the person and they feel completely different, right? They don't feel like the same person with the same personality who wrote that description or that personal statement. And that can be kind of jarring or it can be kind of confusing for an interviewer or admissions committee member to have an expectation of who they're going to meet and then meet the person and feel like, it's surprising that I wasn't expecting that, which is never great for your admissions committee's odds. If your writing is straightforward or it's overly academic or it feels stiff, just recognize that. It can be changed. It has no bearing on who you are as a person. It's just how it feels. But if your writing is that way, just make sure to answer the question, are you okay with that? And if you're not okay with that, change it to fit the fun, bubbly, pensive, thoughtful personality that you are, whatever it is that you want to describe. Not everyone's going to be casual and making jokes on their writing, but not everyone is going to be overly academic or stiff. You have to kind of figure out where you are on that spectrum. There's a wide range of what is okay. It's really just who you are authentically. And we'll have these blue asterisks to show you some examples of places that I felt were a little bit stiff. Number 3, make a concerted effort, and this is especially for our younger premeds, the ones that are not currently applying right now. So if you're a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, senior taking multiple gap years, this one's for you. Right? Make a concerted effort to be remembered for something in particular, to have something on your app that is tangible, something you can hold and grasp onto, something that's memorable for admissions committees to remember you by. This is his application kind of in summary, and you'll notice that I colored things that are similar and I changed the color for things that are separate. So in yellow we have this rotavirus research, this bacteriophage, cryo-electron microscopy research. All 3 of those things are consistent, and it's something that I remembered him by. Different, though, is literacy, project literacy, where he was working with kids, similar to his youth camp counseling, so I bundled those together in the same color. He also was an immunology lab TA and then a youth tutor. He was also a genetics TA, and he did a couple of dance marathons to fundraise for AIDS research. He was also a hospital volunteer. He also did Meals on Wheels, weightlifting, seafood company, Eagle Scout. You can make the arguments that immunology and genetics TAs are similar, or Meals on Wheels works with the geriatric population, which is also kind of vulnerable, like the youth or the youth camp or literacy. So you can kind of try to make these ties, but you notice that I'm really trying to stretch them, right? Whereas in yellow, this is pretty straightforward, right? He studies bacteriophages, he studies rotaviruses, and he studies cryo-electron microscopy. It's like very, very small nanoparticles that he's all studying. Very easy, non-forced connection. When we get to the point where we have this mix of activities, it can feel kind of like a hodgepodge of things, and it's hard for me and my brain to connect the patterns, connect the dots, and try to understand, like, why is this person involved in such a wide breadth of things that don't fully connect. Like my pattern recognition systems get kind of confused. And while that's okay, I just encourage you, if you're earlier on in your journey, be proactive and be intentional, knowing that eventually an admissions committee reader is going to look at a set of experiences, or your resume essentially, and they're going to try and connect the dots and try to get to know you. And it's to your benefit if there is something to latch onto, remember, and easily kind of connect the dots to. And this application has a little bit of issue doing that because the activities are so sparse. I wrote here that there's a wide spectrum of activities, very high breadth with limited impact, very low depth, that make it hard for the applicant to be memorable or stand out. Okay, so let's start with the first conclusion here in the green asterisks, where it is your job to give something that is relatable to the admissions committee reader. So I'm going to go slowly here just to make sure we're starting off the right place. All right, here's the top of the application. Here we go. So we'll start here with this Nature Communications publication. I'm a co-author in our paper, which details the complex structure and mechanisms of transcription or replication of the rotavirus RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. My major contributions included comprehensive modeling of the viral polymerase and capsid proteins, improving the quality of multiple ambiguous regions of consequence, making figures and movies of these structures, and editing the manuscript. This was an enlightening experience that allowed me to work with several veteran experts in the field
Through the hours of literature review, countless revisions, and late nights in the lab, I've come to affirm that diligence is required for any worthwhile project or investment. So I put that here because a lot of this is kind of hard to understand why it's important, right? The thing that I really related to was the hours of literature review, the countless revisions, and the late nights in the lab. Like I understood that because I've had late nights in the lab and I've had to revise things constantly, even though I felt that they were clear, but the reviewers didn't, right? I've had to do stuff like this, so I related to that. But when he's talking about comprehensive modeling of the viral polymerase and capsid proteins and the quality of multiple ambiguous regions, he calls them of consequence, but I don't understand why they're of consequence. He tells us that he makes figures and movies of these structures. That feels a little bit distant to me. It's interesting, so I don't think it's a problem, and this is actually like his work. But I think from a reader's perspective, it's a little bit hard to understand. I would have liked to know what he does, which he describes here, but I also would have wanted to know like maybe why this is important. I like this, relatable, and is supported by the evidence that he shows up here of his work. However, feels a little bit distant. Let's see if we have another example here. So poster presentation. Blank is a national undergraduate program that pushes for the discovery of novel bacteriophages. Okay. After isolating the novel phage, my team performed several wet lab procedures with blank and annotated its genome, which has since been deposited in the public database. Our experiments examined the effect of decreasing pH and increasing temperature applications on its virulence, which culminated in poster presentation. Throughout this project, I developed strong interpersonal skills within a team dynamic, as our group had to communicate effectively, distribute responsibilities, and cooperatively address competing ideas and interests.
Every year, over 50,000 pre-meds apply to medical school, and over 60% don't get into a single one. If this video hasn't been completely trashed thus far, I highly encourage you to take a look at the free resources we have in our description box below. Click the link in the description box to find out more, and for now, let's go back to the video.
Again, I wrote here, it's cool, but I don't really understand why the author is so engaged or invested. This is, again, his research. He's coming across as like this very research-forward type of guy who's interested in the effect of pH and temperature on virulence. And so this is kind of the picture I'm starting to paint in my head of who this person is. I respect the work. I just feel like it's hard to understand and relate to from these individual descriptions, which makes me not as connected to it, right? And this is no fault of the author, and it's no fault of the work, but sometimes when we're doing research in these very obscure niche areas, I think it's important to really just simplify and go back to like, why is this important? And what does the average cardiologist, internal medicine doctor, admissions committee, PhD in education, like what is it that they would benefit from understanding about your research, right? Keeping it simple, because all this other stuff about phages DB, like I don't know what phages DB is, or heck, I almost forgot what bacteriophages are reading this, and I've been in science and medicine for the last 12 years, right? I can't imagine what a radiologist admissions committee member would feel reading this, you know? So relatability is one thing that I want to make sure every person gets a sense of. Whether you're writing your application or you're a younger pre-med thinking about what activities you want to pursue or inactivities, just make sure you understand, like, and practice telling the aunt at the holiday party, this is my work, this is why it's important, because every medical school will have this question, especially if you're in a very niche field of research. And now we go to this third one here, cryo-EM research at this Nanosystems Institute. Working in a cryo-electron microscopy lab, I practice fundamental cryo-EM techniques such as sample optimization and preparation, imaging, and data processing. The lab's goals focus on utilizing these methods to investigate viruses and other relevant nanomachines for prospective medical applications. Here we go. So we're starting to get some relevancy, right? Viruses and nanomachines as some option for medical treatments and therapies. After sample imaging and data reconstruction, I would build and refine viral proteins and other particles of interest with molecular modeling software. These structures would then be evaluated to elucidate the potential mechanisms or function of various proteins. Exceptional models would be deposited on the protein data bank for public access. Okay, so we're starting to understand that this guy's like contributing to the larger scientific conversation. There's a lot of nanoparticles that are still unstudied, so he's doing some of the molecular modeling work with the thesis that if you understand the structure of a protein, then you can maybe tease apart its function. You can maybe tease apart what it connects to and how it acts on the body. Things of this sort is kind of how I'm understanding it. My first week, I remember thinking about how distinct the lab environment felt from the classroom setting. It was a momentous occasion when I loaded my first sample and made out the familiar outlines of bacteriophages. So this is really awesome, right? You see in the textbook the kind of bacteriophage that looks like a spider, and then it's just awesome to see him like in the lab now, and he's loading his sample, and he's like, oh my gosh, it actually looks like the stuff in the textbook. Figures that I had previously only seen in textbooks. It quickly became evident that conducting research was drastically different from studying from tests. A little bit redundant compared to this first sentence, right? I found that success in the lab was predicated on critical thinking, as I had to consult literature to analyze and contextualize my results. In addition to persistence, I also learned the value of working efficiently. For example, I would look for and identify symmetry in proteins so that regions I fixed would propagate through the whole model, saving me precious time. I think this is a great example of I'm an efficient problem solver. I think if you just had this and you didn't say, in addition to persistence, I also value the value of working efficiently, you would pass across the same message. In other words, I don't think he needs to tell us this because he already showed us this. And that was the first immediate thought that I had when he said, oh, that's pretty cool. He looks for symmetry so that other places in the bacteriophage model, he can kind of chunk up the pieces and work through it faster. Like that was my immediate first thought. And when he opens with telling me it falls kind of flat, right? Like I don't like to be told that you're efficient or you're persistent or you're dedicated or you're committed. I think it's better for me to come to my own conclusion when you show me examples of you demonstrating that trait. I've come to respect the dedication and time researchers must invest into the scientific method, arduous as we encounter problems and setbacks along the way, yet it's also gratifying as overcoming these obstacles ultimately made for a much more fulfilling achievement in the end. My work has made me realize that bioinformatics research is a necessary driving force for the continual development of medical treatments and therapies. Again, this sentence and this sentence are the only two that talk about like the larger purpose of bioinformatics, nano research, things of that sort. I wish there was a little bit more delved into that aspect, just because nanoparticles and things of that sort are not common knowledge. In fact, I took a whole class in nanoparticles in college, and I'm still trying to understand what exactly he's referring to. These types of intellectual discoveries are something I look forward to pursuing as a future physician. Okay, so I hope you continue doing nano work here because it seems seems like he has pretty extensive background with this and the other two lab projects that he was on. I wrote here, again, it feels cool, nanoparticles and things like this, but it's almost in this like secluded genius type of way. The lab rat, the evil scientist, this is kind of like the tone of voice that I'm getting. It's hard for the average reader or the admissions committee member to just truly connect to it because why it's important isn't fully really clear, right? And that's the big takeaway. I think as the author of your written application, as well as the creator or the principal agent in your pre-med journey, like the decision maker in your pre-med journey, it's your job to make sure that you are committing to your own genuine, authentic story. And part of that is making sure that you understand kind of like why you're doing all this and what matters to you and why the work you're doing is meaningful overall. I think that's all what really want to tap into because it helps us understand the person behind the page. When we get to a point where you're doing a lot of things, but we're not clear why you're doing it, then it becomes like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool, but I don't fully understand, right? I don't fully understand. You'll see other applicants who, for example, in another video that we filmed recently, the applicant who was born after her mother experienced 5 years of infertility treatment, and her OBGYN is a household name, and she was so moved by how beautiful the gift of life was that she underwent hormonal therapy to donate her own eggs to another family that had trouble conceiving. Like, there's a lot of very clear why. That's very clear why she cares about women's health, why she cares about reproductive medicine, why she cares about fertility. And not everyone's story is like that home run straightforward, but we want to get closer to that than the other end of the spectrum. Okay. So I think those are all the green asterisks. Let's move on to conclusion number 2. Recognize the tone of voice that your writing exudes. Every writing will have its own flavor and voice. Just make sure it's yours, because if it's not yours, when we meet the person, if there's a person-paper mismatch and the expectation of the person in front of me is very different from the paper, then it's very confusing, right? If we get a very bubbly, very lighthearted, joyful writer, and then we meet the person and they're extremely stoic and doesn't say much and is very like academic in the way that they speak, then it feels like, I wasn't expecting that. And that confusion can be often not great for you. So let's see these examples of how his writing comes across with these blue asterisks here. All right, so we'll talk about this literacy project where he's a leader. As a site director for literacy, I was in charge of driving a dozen tutors to site, pairing them with learners, and maintaining open communication with our community partners. I also oversaw the weekly creation of a specific level of curriculum to introduce important themes outside of English. As the outreach director, I acted as a liaison between our club and other campus organizations, planning and coordinating creative collaborations for our various sites. My responsibilities in each of these roles has imparted certain wisdom on how to better motivate and lead, right? You're starting to see some of these phrases. Imparted certain wisdoms. These endeavors have also made me more confident in taking initiative in other areas of my life, right? Okay, so let's go ahead here. I decided to make the transition from tutor to board member because I wanted to make a bigger contribution in a leadership role, one that allowed me to address some of the deficiencies I personally identified in the program, right? Long sentence, some of the deficiencies, just very academic, feels a little bit stiff, right? This included unproductivity. I've never said unproductivity in my life. So it just feels like not something that I would say casually in conversation. It might be the best word for this, but it does give a certain tone of voice, and we have to be cognizant of that. And the lack of an interactive element in the curriculum. As site director, my mindset and demeanor, right, had a profound effect on our tutors. Rather than monitoring groups to stay on task, I found it more effective to set the standard myself. So now he's really coming across as this, like, I lead by example. Instead of just monitoring people, I take the charge and I stand up and I'm first in line, right? My attitude was contagious and prompted the rest of our team to be more accountable. This feels a little bit forward, right? It's almost like self-congratulatory. My attitude was contagious, and because of my leadership, all of the rest of my team members fell in line, right? I believe the guy. The guy's charismatic. He's a great leader. He's a great person. I know him personally. However, when I'm reading this, it feels very like, especially for someone who will not have known you personally, it feels very forward to say that your attitude was the reason and you're setting the standard yourself. I mean, I appreciate and I respect the confidence, but it does come across as a little bit forward. As community outreach director, I saw a unique opportunity to simultaneously address what I perceived to be a repetitive weekly agenda, right? This almost comes across as a little bit critical, and instill my own passion for science and medicine in the kids. I arranged for other parties to come visit our sites. Among these, several CPR certified students taught and performed CPR, while another party gave a presentation on pediatric cancer and the benefits of regular health screenings. All right. Each of the position, I learned valuable lessons about responsible role model, importance, preparation, logistics, and carrying out projects. Incredibly rewarding, ambitious goal, commit the effort, and ultimately see my visions for the club realized. There's a lot of like my visions, my passions instilled, my attitude was contagious, set the standard myself, my mindset and my demeanor had a profound effect, right? I appreciate the level of confidence, but again, it just feels a little stiff. It feels like I never really got a sense of what the vision is what I wrote here, right? We talk about kind of changing the curriculum, making people more accountable, but I didn't really get the larger 10,000 foot mission and vision. What I did feel was like it felt very stiff. I know this person and activity, I know the activity in the club to not be so rigid. I would love to know more about the people, like the tutors and the students, and less information that felt very forward about the author, right? This is kind of in contrast to where there are personal statements like the one I shared earlier about kind of the woman who was born after 5 years of her mother having infertility problems, where in that one, she's describing the doctor as like the facilitator, right? As the household name that's really just the guide, and the hero of the story is the woman's body and the beauty of life and things of the sort. This feels almost on the opposite of the end of the spectrum, where it feels like he's the hero. It was my attitude and my passion and my standard and my vision. A lot of that just feels putting him in the center with the spotlight, with the cape on, and says like, I saved the day. I think it's a little bit, I don't think he meant to come across like this, but it feels a little bit distasteful from my perspective, at least as a reader. And I think it's a shame because I don't think that person is like that. And I don't think this activity is like that. I really enjoy the activity. A lot of my close friends have been a part of it. And this guy is one of my closest friends. But I just want to make sure that you're cognizant when you're writing that writing has a tone of voice and it has a feeling that it gives to the reader. And when I read this is how I felt. Okay, so I think that's a great example of that. All right. 2 stars here. We have Camp Blank is organized for high schoolers interested in pursuing careers in healthcare. Each weekend, I mentored a small group of kids assigned to my family, chaperoning them through the various activities of camp. By sharing advice regarding high school and college, I was able to assuage many of their uncertainties about the future and encourage them to pursue post-secondary education. To improve upon the experience, my fellow counselors and I would gather feedback and implement changes. I saw each occasion as an opportunity to inspire others to reach their full potential. Very kind of pie in the sky, right? Things came full circle when one camper got accepted to UCLA and personally reached out to share the news. That's awesome, right? So I actually want to compare this to another colleague of mine who's actually in the same experience. And I want you to compare the kind of energy levels of the writing, right? Some phrases that I want you to focus on here. Chaperoning, assuage many of their uncertainties, right? Things like this that feel a little bit more academic and stiff. Let's compare it to this other example of the same description from another person's eyes. All right, so we have this exact same experience here on the right about the same children's camp, however, from a different person's perspective. Here we go. I greatly benefited from being guided and encouraged by supportive mentors. So immediately it's like, starts with, I had the benefit of having mentors, whereas the other one is like, I encourage, I am the mentor, I am in the spotlight, right? Countless students are not as fortunate as I am. Again, very deferential. And this motivated me to join camp. Our mission is to mentor students from underserved areas of Los Angeles. Like, in your face, immediately, this is our goal, this is our vision. Whereas the other one is like, I'm not really sure what the vision is. We're interested in medical careers. We do this by hosting these students for 3 spring days at a comfortable campsite, complete with cabins and meeting halls, introduce them to professionals who represent a variety of different medical careers. So now you're starting to read this, like, you get this picture, right, of these kids who are interested in medicine from underserved parts of LA, and they go for 3 beautiful spring days at a comfortable campsite, compared to the other one, which is a little stiff, like, I assuage their concerns. When I first joined as a counselor in 2016, I fundraised for Family of 5, and then I served as my family's counselor. Not mentor, but like counselor, right? It's a different word choice. By the end of camp, I found myself acting as their mentor. Okay, so now you transition to the mentor, explaining college, FAFSA, SAT. I continue to mentor them for 2 ensuing years, and I'm happy that all 5 are now in college, right? Very similar to the other person who is now at UCLA. Seeking more responsibility, I became a member of the board, recruiting speakers. I learned how to gain the attention commitment of very busy people, flexibility, improv, contingency planning. So this is more board stuff. And then he talks about the issues that he had for a presentation. All this happened behind the scenes, and the camp went off smoothly. I was elected as the director for the next year, and I will do my best to inspire a group of students and mentors, right? There's like no promise here. He'll say, honestly, I'll do my best. I hope that we'll have a new group of students that will just be as inspired as the last one, but I'll do my best. It's almost this like yes sir, deferential type of attitude, a gratitude almost, whereas this feels a little bit more like matter of fact, very straightforward, very stiff sometimes, right? Assign to my family, assuage their concerns, encourage them post-secondary education, to improve upon the experience. My fellow counselors and I would gather feedback and implement changes every year. It's a little bit unclear what that really means, like what was the feedback, what changes were you making, things of that sort. So this is an example of how the same experience can be seen differently by 2 different people and written in different ways by 2 different people. Again, I don't think this says anything about the person who wrote it. I think this says something about just being cognizant of making sure that your personality and your attitude is reflected on the paper, because oftentimes it's not, right? And oftentimes we see these pieces of writing that feel way more stiff, and then we meet the person and they're completely bubbly and charismatic. And I think that means that your writing did not do a good job of representing who you are as a person. And this is, in my eyes, a clear example of that. Right? We can look at some of the phrases and some of the other ones too, just to get a sense of just the impact of like the word choice even, right? The other applicant went for the word counselor. And this one you have words like demeanor, unproductivity, the lack of an interactive element. It feels very academic, right? It feels very complex. I try to write in a max 5th to 7th grade level, just because there's no need to overcomplicate the writing. We're not trying to impress people with our vocabulary. We're trying to impress people with our clarity and our reasoning and our stories and data, right? I think those are the things we should focus on. Okay, so those are the 2 blue asterisks. We have another one here, which is life sciences learning assistant. As an assistant for a genetics class, I fostered teamwork and asked leading questions to facilitate learning. I also formulated my own lesson plans to supplement the coursework and offered additional help during office hours. Teaching requires competence, tenacity, and creativity. I recall one art student who struggled with a certain topic. After asking her to draw a map of the chromosomes, she was able to understand the problem. By personalizing concepts, I found that I was able to communicate more effectively. These efforts have instilled in me the values of patience and resilience, as these qualities are integral in my ability to help confuse and discourage students. Okay, so places that feel very matter-of-fact, right? I annotated, feels very matter-of-fact, comes across with a different tone and warmth than other pieces of writing, right? I fostered teamwork and asked leading questions to facilitate learning, right? This is a very wordy phrase, leading questions to facilitate learning. Formulated my own lesson plans to supplement the coursework and offered additional help. Teaching requires competence, tenacity, and creativity. Like I just got thrown 3 buzzwords right in my face, right? This is where I think the writing becomes great. I remember, let's even simplify. I remember one art student who struggled with a certain genetics topic. After asking her to draw a map of the chromosomes, she was able to better understand the problem. This is probably a 4th grade level writing, right? No fancy words. The biggest word is probably recall, right? Or chromosomes, I guess. But this tells a story of an art student who can't conceptualize things until she draws and she understands through her drawing, right? I love how he bridges art and science simply here. And that tells me that he's creative. That tells me that he's adaptable and flexible in his learning. That tells me he's a good communicator and empathetic because he understands where that student comes from. When he says teaching requires competence and tenacity, I don't really feel that. I don't really feel any example that demonstrated competence or tenacity, especially if he just tells you straight off, right? So I really encourage people. I think it feels very anxiety driving to write without saying, look, I'm competent, or I'm tenacious, or I'm creative. But when you do that, paradoxically, it makes you sound less competent and less tenacious. And instead, when you replace it with simple writing, with stories, the reader really starts to like connect the dots themselves and really starts to remember you and actively think about you. Whereas when I'm reading this, I'm just like passively going through it because I've seen these words a million times. Teaching requires competence, tenacity, and creativity. Okay, next sentence, right? Okay, so that's another great paragraph explaining tone of voice. And I think we have one more in these personal statements. So why don't we just review that now? Personal statement, here we go. I don't know how, the little girl said, her voice thick with apprehension. So you see how this is much more story-like compared to all the other ones that we've read? Sure you do. Put the inhaler to your mouth, press the button on top, and inhale for as deep as you can. Hold it for 5 seconds, said Dr. Blank, as he demonstrated once again. I couldn't explain it. From a technical standpoint, this was hardly the most intriguing diagnosis I had observed, but something about the circumstances of this particular exam piqued my interest. Moments ago, Dr. Blank had detailed the pathology of asthma and stressed the implications of this would have moving forward, right? A little bit academic there. Still, the child remained adamant about not using the inhaler. But why? None of my friends have to, she insisted, right? I just love how simple this is. But why? None of my friends have. This is very on brand for a child. And I want the writing to be this simple, this flowy. I suspected that we had uncovered and look at the contrast, right? I suspected that we had uncovered the underlying reasons behind her objection, fear and humiliation. A very wordy phrase right after this, very pure, but why? None of my friends have to. And that just hits me as a little bit of contrast I don't love. I noticed this to be a common occurrence in the clinic. That emotion often clouded one's judgment. Dr. Blank smiled, for he had handled similar situations before. Well, dear, you have sensitive lungs. This inhaler contains medicine that help you breathe easier. With this, you can play with your friends for as long as you want. Again, the words and phrases that I remember so vividly are the simplest ones. With this, you can play with your friends for as long as you want. That's probably second grade level, right? These sincere words had a calming effect that prompted the girl to reconsider her initial stance and come to trust his counsel. Right here. Very academic, very intellectual type of writing, right? Trust his counsel, like the Jedi Darth Vader type counsel. While walking the family back to the lobby, I realized that my curious fascination with this case stemmed from the remarkable parallels I noticed between the doctor-patient interaction and my own experiences in pedagogy and mentorship. Very wordy, right? Curious fascination, remarkable parallels, own experiences in pedagogy, right? I understand why he chose those words because they simplify what he's talking about, but I do think it is very, very wordy, right? Other annotations that I wrote and highlighted in purple, it's just, I wrote, welcome to the clinic room. Like, can you see yourself as a fly on this wall with this doctor speaking to this very tiny little girl who doesn't want to breathe in this medicine in front of her friends because that just makes her different, and she doesn't want to be different. She just wants to play with everyone on the playground. And doctor flipping the conversation, saying like, this will help you play so that you can breathe and things of this sort. It just feels like very inviting and engaging. And I love this paragraph that he opens with, especially the conversations. They feel very authentic. As a learning assistant for life science courses, I formulated each lesson plan with a goal that each student would leave more confident and enlightened. For example, like I have never had one of my teaching lessons be, teaching objectives be, I want every student to leave more enlightened, right? Like that's not a phrase that I typically use when it comes to teaching. And so when we use words like that, it makes you feel like, is this person like truly involved with pedagogy? And yes, I know he is. But two, then it becomes like, is this person trying to write with bigger words to impress me? Which I think is what happened, right? That's never an objective. I don't want students to be enlightened, confident, yes, right? But these are phrases that really like my brain pattern recognition picks up on, because I'm used to seeing them in Siddhartha Gautama's text of Buddhist philosophy, and not talking about life sciences, TA for molecular biology or genetics, right? As a camp counselor for high schoolers, I did my best impression of a TED Talk speaker, hoping to rally them to pursue a post-secondary education and broaden their horizons. Again, rallying people to pursue college, right? I don't really call it post-secondary education, I call it college, and then broaden their horizons. I've never wanted to broaden anyone's horizons, but maybe open their mind, make them a little bit more open-minded, have them think about more things that they're used to, right? I know this person in real life. He doesn't really talk like this, so I think it's interesting that when he writes, it comes across like this. As a personal mentor to struggling second grade Angel, I made it my utmost priority to ensure that he improved his literacy skills every week. I never foresaw that these non-clinical ventures would play such a influential role in molding my perspective and definition of medicine. Again, foresaw non-clinical ventures, right, in molding my perspective and definition of medicine. It's very artsy, very metaphorical, but it's also very academic. And he doesn't really elaborate how Angel influenced his perspective of medicine. He brings up Angel and then never really explains why he affected his path to become a doctor. These endeavors have led me to ascertain that the role of physician overlaps considerably with that of an educator. How? It isn't not really fully explained. Both professions require comprehensive knowledge in their respective fields, okay, as well as the aptitude to effectively convey this information based on the personalized needs of their client. Essentially, to communicate in a way that is understandable to the person on the other side, which I think is kind of paradoxical, because he's talking about effective, clear communication, but he's writing in a way that's like kind of confusing to understand. Indeed, I saw that the process in which I diagrammed concepts, shared advice, and offered assistance to students had much in common with the meticulous and methodical approach physicians employ when assessing patients. Like, I love that he builds this parallel between education and medicine, and I see the point that he's making, but he's really working my brain here. Like, I'm really trying to understand what it is exactly that he's saying, and I'm trying to decipher the words more than the ideas, which is kind of where we want to get to, right? The ideas are the most important thing here. Sharing your worldview is more important here. Not like, I shouldn't be slowed down by trying to understand the words that you're using. And then the last point I'll make is, compare this paragraph and how it feels with this paragraph. And, well, dear, you have sensitive lungs. With this, you can play with your friends for as long as you want. Versus meticulous and methodical approach, non-clinical ventures, ascertain the role of a physician, right? It feels very different. Next. However, the two professions diverge in a crucial aspect. Okay, this is nice. This is like a nice little transition out, and I think it works well. Still, it reads very much like an academic seminar or paper and less a story, right? You went, they're similar this way, and then this is how they're different. It's almost like a college essay. Doctors help people at their most helpless and susceptible states. They function as preemptive safety nets, catching people when their health slips and enabling them to return to their everyday lives. It was this fundamental difference that ultimately made me gravitate towards a career in medicine over academia. I can vividly recall, so he never really talks about academia at all in this, right? Maybe as a teacher, but not really as a researcher. I can vividly recall the atmosphere in the exam room. Between us, I could extend the girl my tacit sympathies, and her parents could provide their comforting embrace. In the end, only Dr. Chan had the training and expertise to give her a definitive solution, and just as importantly, reassurance that everything was going to be okay. I could relate to the gratification that comes from helping people understand and make sense of things, but having the ability to guide others through their most physically and emotionally vulnerable moments, that was a wholly unfamiliar sensation. So essentially, he's saying that they both have knowledge in their fields. They both have, like teachers and doctors, they both have the ability to communicate in an empathetic way. But doctors have a unique toolkit and a unique solution to actually, to help people with their pathologies specifically, right? And you'll notice that the doctor is the hero here, right? Only Dr. Chan had the training and expertise to deliver a definitive solution. And that's okay, but just recognize that other personal statements have different tones of voice and different energies where the doctor's not the hero. The doctor's simply a guide or a facilitator or a trained friend and close compatriot, right? A comrade. And that feels very different. When you get a pre-med student who sees the doctor as a hero and wants to be a doctor, then you get a sense like, okay, that person wants to be a hero. When you get a person who says that doctors are really just civil servants and I want to be a doctor to help people, then it becomes like, oh, okay, that person wants to be more of a civil servant. He or she seems to be coming from a more humble, yes, sir, grateful type of perspective. I'm not saying that this author is not grateful and not humble, but it does come across as like he wants to put on a cape and be in the spotlight, right? As I continue to observe paradigms of this personal revelation as a blank volunteer, I strove to improve myself in aspects that would allow me to better comprehend this delicate process. I'm not sure what delicate process he's referring to. Thus, I focus on forming genuine relationships with the patients I attended to. Very wordy, right? Genuine relationships with the patients I attended to. I've never attended to a patient personally. I just care for them, right? Although I lacked the means to fully alleviate each individual's physical suffering, I found that I could still uplift their spirits through simple acts of kindness. I love how simple this is, right? Simple acts of kindness. I would say that in everyday life. It still amazes me that a virtual stranger can foster happiness merely by sharing a heartfelt conversation. Through these events, I came to appreciate the transformative power of human empathy and the resilience of the human spirit. Like very big picture ideas that I don't think fully lands because he hasn't really built it up to that scale yet. I reflected on how the impact I made imbued a unique satisfaction that was incomparable to my other experiences. The art of education is intertwined with the practice of medicine. An effective physician is a versatile teacher, one who ensures that patients are fully informed and have a thorough understanding of the potential treatment options. Of course, I'm not so naive as to suggest that every affliction, or complication can be cured through sheer optimism. Being around bedridden patients with all varieties of debilitating prognoses has shown me that harsh reality firsthand. At the same time, I'm also grateful solace a doctor's presence can provide to affirm that one is instilling hope and sense of direction during life's darkest hours. Career in medicine, incorporate various passions, empowering people, health adversities, inclusive education, support, and household. You can kind of get a sense, right? The last two paragraphs were a slog for me to read through. Just a bunch of huge phrases that are hard again for my brain is like tired of reading phrases like attended to and versatile, and of course I'm not saying an affliction or debilitating prognoses or solace or instilling hope and a sense of direction during life's darkest hours. It's like kind of cliche after cliche after cliche after cliche after cliche after cliche, and really the only supporting evidence that we have is this little girl who has asthma, which I think is fantastic, and that lessens the blow of some of these cliches. But the amount of kind of cliches back to back to back to back, you could hear as I was reading it, I was just trying to get through it. And you don't want your admissions committee member you don't want their main goal to just get through your paper, right? Your personal statement. You want them to sit, digest, and enjoy your personal statement as it's meant to be kind of enjoyed. And that was a little bit difficult for me just because of the tone of voice. Very stiff, very academic, very pie in the sky, very doctor as a hero, right? Those ideas and concepts were a little bit more difficult for me to enjoy and read through. And again, it doesn't say anything about the person. I think the person is nowhere like this. He's going to be a fantastic doctor. He is a fantastic friend. And I am like a little bit sad that this personal statement is kind of how he came across. because I know that he's not like this as a person. And I'm very glad that the school that offered him interviews gave him that chance to meet him in person, because then they started to really get a sense of like who that person was behind this piece of paper. And I'm glad that they were very positively surprised, as I am every single day interacting with a guy, that he is a great medical student, great physician, soon-to-be physician, and things of that sort. But that doesn't protect him from recognizing that his personal statement does not really feel that way or sound that way. And it's great. So I thank him for offering the platform here to be vulnerable and share with us kind of what he put on paper. It's not easy to share some of this stuff. And so we are all learning and benefiting from a person who's great in person, but on paper sounds like a very stiff academic lab scientist who thinks doctors are heroes, right? All right. So that is point number 2. Number 3, make a concerted effort to be remembered for something in particular. I went through this already. So let's go through from the top, and you'll get a sense of like how big picture, these are all the things that he's involved with. And it just doesn't feel like it's so cohesive or connected. And that ends up, I think, being one of the weaknesses of his overall application. So let's see what we have not chatted about already. So we chatted about the Nature Communications publication. We chatted about this learning assistant already. Actually, no, we haven't. So let's talk about this. As an assistant in introductory microbiology lab, I sought to help students master the fundamental lab techniques. These included procedures such as growing bacterial colonies and conducting tests and assays. In addition to explaining concepts, I performed detailed demonstrations to ensure that students could fully understand the material and replicate the desired results. I also attended meetings with instructional staff, learning objectives, reflected on the previous week. Having once struggled with bench work myself, I relish being able to use my resources to help others in the same position. So finally, right, he writes something that's relatable. I have sucked at bench work. I have sucked at shooting a basketball. I have sucked at communicating with my partner, right? I have sucked at calling my parents. And I love the fact that I'm better at that now. And I think that, as simple as it is, it's relatable, right? It's more relatable than bacterial colonies and tests and assays and cryo-electron microscopy and bacteriophages and molecular repeating motifs, right? Those things are really hard to relate to, but this is very human. And I think as a reader, I appreciate that. I also love how straightforward this is, right? So I annotated straightforward. I love how he didn't overextend it, but I also recognize that it feels flat, not really something he loved, and that's okay. You don't have to love your laboratory assistant position, right? It doesn't have to be the most meaningful thing that you did, given that you did it for 3 months and 60 hours, right? But the downfall most premeds have in this situation is overextending and saying like, now because of this 60-hour, 2-month experience, I want to build a full career in academia, and I want to be a teacher and a doctor at the same time, teaching medical students and residents and junior attendings all the way through, right? There's no need to go pie in the sky. Teaching is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'm glad he doesn't do that. Whereas there are other places where we've seen that he does overextend it a little bit, and there are like very big conclusions that don't really hit as hard. Like in the personal statement here, right? The alleviate each individual's physical suffering, or the resilience of the human spirit, or the transformative power of empathy, or debilitating prognoses, right? These really big phrases that just are just like really going for a huge home run. Yeah, we don't need these, especially if you don't truly feel that way about it, right? And he doesn't do that, which I think is fantastic. We talked about the poster presentations. We talked about the literacy project. We talked about camp counselor and the cryo-EM research. This one is the map of the chromosomes we've talked about. Clinician shadowing. Okay, so here's a great example of the opposite, where I think he does overextend it. Shadowing a seasoned internist, able to observe how a doctor should carry himself and handle patients. Assisted with other tasks around the office, I learned a physician must balance administrative and clinical duties. I shadowed this pediatrician, who has allowed me to further explore my interest in pediatrics. I now have a better understanding of how our healthcare system operates, including what successfully running a private practice entails. Like, what does that mean? How does our health system operate? How should a doctor carry himself? How should they handle patients? Learning from these consummate, like I've never used that word in my life. I've gained a deeper appreciation for the work primary care physicians do. I especially, why? What appreciation do you have? I especially admire the lasting relationships they form with their patients. So I think there's a lot of back-to-back cliches, right? The successfully running a private practice, how a doctor can care of himself, how the health system operates, the deeper appreciation for primary care physicians. I think he's overextending it here. You can keep it simple and talk about the patients that you saw or what you did see and what you learned about how overburdening it is to be an administrator and a clinical physician. And you can make commentary about how it's interesting that you're never really taught administrative stuff in medical school, but half of your job is administrative stuff, right? And just keep it simple and short and targeted and specific instead of going broad, like how the health system operates. That's a very broad thing, from insurance to underserved populations to logistics management to training medical providers to the supply and demand of healthcare in America to public policy, right? There's a million things here. And successfully running a private practice entails from law to accounting to tax code to billing. Like, there's a lot of things there as well. The scope is just too big for something that's 1 month and 60 hours, right? All right. Charity fundraising, dance marathon, having attended AIDS walk and relay in the past, and you want to continue this tradition in college. I fundraised for and participated in dance marathon and relay, pediatric AIDS, American Cancer Societies. I danced or walked with friends and strangers alike and was inspired by the testaments of survivors and their loved ones. Throughout these experiences, I learned that you can lend your support to noble causes through straightforward means. I believe that this is a social responsibility to raise awareness for and get involved in the movements that widely impact our communities. Okay, I like how straightforward it is. He danced, he walked, he fundraised, and he thinks it's a social responsibility to raise awareness. I can get behind that. That's fine. Okay, and then we have a couple more here. Community service, medical volunteering. So this is a hospital volunteering experience. Volunteering in 4 different departments. I transported patients, attended to their needs, assisted hospital staff with various errands. Through spending intimate time with patients, helping them with basic everyday tasks, I was humbled by the opportunity to help people by way of such simple actions, right? A little bit redundant, simple actions, basic everyday tasks. Observing medical practitioners collectively operate as a team showed me that comprehensive patient care is a collective effort, and again, kind of redundant, right? Collectively operate as a team is a collective effort that requires precise communication and coordination. Also very redundant, right? More coordination type talk. I've since become increasingly adept at handling patients, I don't know what that means, and more mindful about conducting myself in a professional manner in clinical settings, right? Little evidence to support such strong claims. He says he's really adept at handling patients, but there's no evidence of that. No story, no data, nothing. Ironically, I gained the most meaningful insights from the most uneventful shifts merely accompanying patients rather than the busier ones observing procedures and assisting doctors. Walking into a room, I could expect to meet someone with an entirely different personality and temperament from the last. Thus, I worked to improve my bedside manner and adapt my mannerisms accordingly to help patients feel more comfortable. Working with children in the PICU and pediatrics gave me similar resolve. I found that some kids preferred coddling, others were more independent and cherished their autonomy. Love it. I love that this is the first detail that we get, right? This required me to properly read a room and notice intricate details like body language to determine how to best approach and aid each person. I believe this kind of perceptive acuity, right, is just very, very academic, is an overlooked skill that has personally helped me better establish rapport with patients. I've concluded that disciplined and passionate care providers can drastically improve patients' mood and outlooks. This was evident in how patients and their families rarely failed to express their gratitude for my assistant. This is very Ford, right? It is obvious because patients almost never forgot to tell me how grateful they were for my help, right? Very Ford. Being the recipient of such appreciation has taught me the power of presence and how making oneself readily available to help in any given capacity has its own therapeutic properties. Look, I'm not criticizing the guy. I wrote, when you read my own application breakdown, which is also publicly available on YouTube, you can see that I wrote also very similarly. We probably had this preconception that writing bigger, writing fancier phrases, sounding more intellectual was good for us. But now as I'm reading these on the other side, I can see how it lands, right? This seems like very forward. I think if people are grateful for your assistance and you're a true, humble civil servant, you don't really need to bring it up, right? It kind of naturally is felt and understood and never needs to be explicitly said. But the rest of the paragraphs, you can also notice I'm trying to speed through it because there's a lot of difficult words and phrases to get through. And so I want to make sure that like my mind is kind of processing it. It's just kind of wordy. And the best advice I can give anyone is try to write in a 5th to 7th grade level. And that will make it clear that you're not hiding behind words and fancy phrases. You're trying to prop up your ideas instead. And that's kind of the position you want to be in. Okay, next we have Meals on Wheels, translate geriatric class into productive action in the real world, seasoned driver, transported meals to immobile residents over Los Angeles. Very cool, right? Deliveries had important consequences as they served as a sole food support source for many elderly clients. Very important. After we finished our route, I had the chance to coordinate activities such as mobility exercises with the seniors back at the center. Made me more conscious of the growing elderly demographic and the corresponding need for senior facilities. Okay, I love it. Very straightforward, 30 hours. He's delivering food to elderly people during the pandemic where it's not safe for them to go outside. I love it, right? Simple. He doesn't go too pie in the sky. He doesn't go with these big words. Keeps it simple. Next activity, we have this youth tutor. It's part of this literacy club that we talked about earlier. But I think this is as a volunteer, not as a leader. So literacy is a student-run organization dedicated to addressing the pressing issue of youth literacy through individualized tutoring and mentorship. I had the pleasure of tutoring several remarkable grade school kids from various underserved communities in reading, writing, math, and other curriculum. Beyond improving my etiquette with children, working with this demographic has made me cognizant of the socioeconomic inequalities that continue to persist in society, a cycle that seems to partly stem from an imperfect education system. Very academic, right? This sounds like a thesis. What if we just wrote a example or a story of a child who fell behind in math because they were always late to first period because they didn't have mom to drop them off at school. They had to take the bus, and the bus routes always guaranteed that he was going to be 15 minutes late to class. And so when he sat into class, he was always a little bit behind when it came to math. That tells the entire thing, right? It tells you about the socioeconomic inequalities because the mom has to work the night shift in addition to her day job. It tells you about the imperfect education system that's not flexible enough to support this child, right? But it tells it in a way that's relatable. It tells in a way that we can understand and hold on to. And this doesn't, right? Etiquette with children, cognizant of socioeconomic inequalities, a cycle that seems to partly stem from an imperfect education system. Hard to understand. Watching these kids develop and improve each week was not only personally rewarding, but also a testament to the positive influence of community work. I just wish he talked about a kid that like really stood out to him. You know, he talks about the 2nd grade Angel here, but he doesn't really talk about his work with Angel. It makes me feel like I want to know more, right? And because I don't know more, I can't really understand the level of impact that he had. I can't really appreciate how he sees education. Okay, next. Weightlifting, which began as nothing more than a carefree hobby, has transformed into an irreplaceable regimen in my life. I began to take this activity more seriously when I discovered I could apply the scientific principles behind nutrition, human physiology, and sleep to maximize my results. I found that unlike other team sports I played, I was the only one holding myself accountable. Very cool thought, right? Which challenged me to persevere. It doesn't need this phrase. I was the only one holding myself accountable. That automatically tells me that you have to challenge yourself because no one else is. Beyond allowing myself to stay in physical shape, this type of training has also been beneficial for my mental health. When faced with whatever pressures life threw at me, I could expect to find lucidity after an intense workout. Love it. I love it, right? This is something he's been doing for 5 years. It's irreplaceable. He is serious about it. talks about nutrition, physiology, and sleep. He talks about how he is in his own mental cage and he's in his own mental arena, and everything that he has earned in the weight room is off the back of him and his grit and his perseverance. It's simple, right? It tells me a lot about the person in 700 characters, and I'm grateful that I know this about him now. Next, office assistant, working for an international seafood company, paid employment, physical labor, packaging, transporting shipments, assisting the health and safety manager with data entry, paperwork, other assignments, demanded effective organizational and time management skills, besides confirming that I would be unsatisfied in an occupation that lacked meaningful human interaction. I guess he didn't like working with frozen seafood. Another imperative lesson that I learned from working a 9-to-5 was the value of $1. Okay. I can confidently say that I now exercise better judgment when it comes to personal finance. I like it. I just think it sounds kind of funny knowing the guy. The value of $1, right? But these are actually, I'm going to take that back. I enjoy these because it starts showing the personality of the author, right? The person who says, yeah, I was working in that frozen seafood company, and man, I was working hard for 8 hours, and I barely made, back in, 2018, I barely made $60 total, right? Less than $10 an hour. And then when I went to dinner with my friends and paid $20 for my beef noodle soup and a drink, I realized that that was 3 hours of my time or 4 hours of my time. And so I learned the value of $1. I just, it gets the sense of the personality of the person that's writing this. And so in ways that are professional, but also preserve your personality, I think these are great ways to demonstrate kind of who you are. He's kind of a lighthearted guy, and so I think this phrase is kind of funny. Now exercise better judgment when it comes to personal finances. Fantastic. And lastly, he's an Eagle Scout, earned by 4% of Boy Scouts. I love anything that's relative, right? So I can understand, he's the top 4% of Boy Scouts. Is the pinnacle of scouting, requiring years of service and leadership. My experiences culminate in large-scale community service, restoration of vehicles at a museum. I've gained, contributed for the individual I am today. I continue embodying the scouting spirit in my college years by staying involved in community work and demonstrating leadership. Scouting has taught me the most meaningful achievements are never accomplished overnight. Okay, great. Simple, not a large scope, close to earth, very relatable, right? There are some things that are just going to be more relatable than others. More people have more experience with scouting than they do of cryo-electron microscopy. So this doesn't need that much of an explanation. But again, now I'm starting to get a picture of this guy. He's an Eagle Scout. He probably spent a summer at an aunt's or uncle's seafood company. He weightlifts on his free time. And so you're starting to get a sense of who he is outside of work. But then you kind of collect everything where he's doing extracurricularly for his pre-med journey, and you're starting to get a little confused, right? Working with kids, kid counselor, but also immunology lab TA, a tutor, a genetics TA, fundraising for AIDS, which you could also is like related to kids, right? Because it was like the pediatric cancer organization was also something that he danced or walked for. Hospital volunteer, Meals on Wheels is geriatrics. So we kind of don't get a full, clear picture other than maybe kids and then maybe nano research, right? And so those things, because they're kind of loose associations in my head, it's a little bit hard to remember the application in its entirety. Okay. So that is our application breakdown for our fantastic 3.85 science, 3.83 total GPA, 514 MCAT from California, an overrepresented majority, not an URM, who eventually ends up getting into a fantastic top 60 US MD medical school. There are weaknesses in this application, a considerable amount of them that I outlined in these conclusions and broke down with clear examples, but there's a lot of good things that he does in this application that I also remark on, especially with the stories that feel very relatable, the kid with asthma, all these other fantastic things that just really get a sense of who the person is, how he operates, and just notice that most of the good things happen when a story is told. I recall one art student who drew a map of the chromosomes, right? That is relatable. That helps you understand the picture in your mind. The fact that he struggled with bench work himself and then now is a TA for it is understandable and relatable to people. The clinic room that he puts you in, where the little girl just wants to play foursquare and tetherball with her classmates, but the doctor is having trouble convincing her or telling her why she needs an inhaler, right? Stories are king. Make sure you understand the tone of voice that you're writing with, and make sure that it's consistent and authentic to you. And then intentionally make sure that you build your pre-med journey so that we don't have to stretch to make connections, and that we can easily figure out and remember something tangible, something easily that we can hold on to, something to remember you by. I think that will all help with your pre-med journey. Hopefully you learned something in this application breakdown. Thank you again for staying to the end. I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
I hope you saw a ton of fantastic ways that this UCLA pre-med took advantage of his opportunities at a big public campus like UCLA. I also hope you recognized some of the mistakes that he made in his pre-med journey that made him look very generic and prevented him from standing out from the other 1,297 pre-meds applying from UCLA. And if you want to see another example of how a pre-med applicant caught the eye of his dream medical school, despite coming from a busy campus like UCLA or any other public campus for that matter, you'll want to watch this application here. This is a 3.7 GPA, 512 MCAT, classified as overrepresented in medicine, also applying from UCLA, who ends up at a top 50 medical school without taking any extra time off. If you want to learn what it takes to get into medical school without a gap year on a busy campus like UCLA, you'll for sure want to see how this applicant did it. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you over there.